Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of recycled station air. And the smell hit her immediately, a strange mix of metal and something almost sweet. Like flowers from a world she would never visit, the Galactic Integration Academy rose before her like a city made of glass and light. And she had to remind herself that she belonged here, that she had earned her place among species who had traveled the stars for thousands of years before humans even discovered fire. She was 28 years old, a xenobiologist from Earth, and she was the first human ever admitted to the advanced interspecies relations program at Station Vareth 7. No pressure at all. The hallways stretched in every direction, filled with beings that made her feel very small and very alone. And she kept her head high as she walked because her mother had always told her that confidence was a shield even when you felt like running away. A creature with too many legs skittered past her on the ceiling, and something that looked like a walking tree nodded what might have been a greeting. And Elena nodded back because politeness cost nothing. She found the lecture hall after 20 minutes of wrong turns and confused looks at her navigation device. And when she stepped through the door, every single head turned to look at her. The room fell silent. There were perhaps 60 students, arranged in curved rows that rose toward the back of the hall. And Elena had never seen so many different species in one place. And she realized with a sinking feeling that she was the only human in the room. She was probably the only human most of them had ever seen. A four-armed being at the front of the room, Professor Kethel. She assumed from the course materials, watched her with eye stalks that moved independently of each other. And his expression was impossible to read. "You must be the human representative," he said. And his voice was surprisingly gentle, almost musical. "Elena Vasquez," she confirmed. And she was proud that her voice did not shake. "Find a seat, please." She climbed the stairs toward the back of the room, feeling the weight of dozens of alien stares on her skin. And she heard the whispers starting before she was halfway up. "That is a human? So small, how did they survive at all?" "Deathworlders," I heard. "But look at those teeth. They are flat. No claws, no armor, no venom. What do they even have?" Elena kept her face calm and found an empty seat near the back corner. And she sat down and pulled out her tablet and pretended that the whispers did not hurt. She had known this would happen, had prepared herself for it during the long journey from Earth. But knowing and experiencing were very different things. A movement caught her attention, and she looked to her left and felt her stomach drop. The creature sitting 3 seats away was the largest living thing she had ever seen outside of a zoo. And it was watching her with eyes that glowed like embers and a face covered with natural armor. A Torvange had read about them during her preparation apex. Predators from a high-gravity world, evolved to hunt and kill anything that moved. Responsible for conquering 3 star systems before the Galactic Accord convinced them that trade was more profitable than war. This one had to weigh at least 400 kilograms. And his 6 limbs were thick with muscle under plates of bone-like armor. And when he smiled at her, she saw teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Welcome to the Academy." "Soft thing," the Torven rumbled, and his voice was so deep she felt it in her chest more than heard it with her ears. "Thank you," Elena said. And she turned back to face the front of the room. Torvan laughed, and the sound was like rocks grinding together. Professor Cathal began the lecture, explaining that this semester would focus on species capabilities and cooperative strengths, and that each representative would eventually demonstrate their species' unique evolutionary advantages. Understanding what each species brings to our galactic community is essential for true cooperation, the professor explained. And his 4 hands moved in graceful patterns as he spoke. "We must move beyond fear and assumption to genuine knowledge." Elena took notes and tried to ignore the Torvan's eyes on her, but she could feel his amusement like heat from a fire. When the lecture ended, students began filing out, and Elena gathered her things slowly. Hoping to avoid the crowd, she was not fast enough. Human, the Torvald said. And suddenly he was standing beside her, and she had to crane her neck back to see his face. I am Grathcall of the Broken Mountain clan. Elena Vasquez of Earth, he repeated. And the words sounded strange in his rumbling voice. The death world that produces creatures like you, I confess I expected something more impressive. I will try not to disappoint you, Elena said. And she meant it as a dismissal, but Grathcall only laughed again. You are brave for something so fragile, he said. And he leaned closer, and his breath smelled like copper. But bravery is not enough here. Softing, this program is designed for species that matter, species that contribute, species that can survive. I survived Earth, Elena said quietly. I think I can survive a classroom. Grathcall's eyes narrowed. And for a moment something flickered in them, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Then he straightened and turned away. And his final words drifted back to her as he left the hall. The soft thing will not last a rotation. Elena stood alone in the empty lecture hall. And she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. And she looked down at her hands, small hands, soft hands. Hands that had never torn flesh or crushed bone. But they were steady. She picked up her bag and walked out of the hall. And she made herself a silent promise she would last more than a rotation. She would last until every single one of them understood exactly what humans were capable of. And then she would make them remember. The weeks passed slowly, and Elena learned to navigate the academy like water flowing around stones, never pushing, never demanding. Just finding the path of least resistance. She excelled in her classes because that was something she could control. And her grades climbed while she kept her head down and her mouth shut and her observation sharp. The other students did not make it easy in the cafeteria. Someone would accidentally bump her tray, and her food would scatter across the floor while laughter echoed around her in the hallways. Larger species would refuse to move aside, forcing her to press against the wall as they passed in group discussions. Her comments were ignored or talked over, as if her voice was too quiet to hear. Even when she spoke clearly, she learned to eat quickly and alone, to walk close to the walls, to wait until others finished speaking before she tried again, and she learned to watch. The academy had a strict social hierarchy, and Elena mapped it in her mind like a scientist studying a new ecosystem. Predator species sat at the top: the Torvald, the blade-armed Kethrix, the venomous Sylphkai, and they moved through the station with the confidence of beings who had never been prey. Below them came the omnivore species, respected but not feared, useful but not dominant, and at the bottom sat the prey species, the fast, the cautious, a species that had evolved to run rather than fight humans. Elena realized did not fit neatly into any category, and that confusion made the other students uncomfortable. They looked at her flat teeth and saw a herbivore, but they had heard stories about human violence that made no sense for a plant-eater. They saw her small size and assumed weakness, but her homeworld was classified as a Category 12 death world, one of the most dangerous in the known galaxy. She was a puzzle they could not solve, and so they dismissed her as an error, a fluke species that had somehow stumbled into space travel through pure luck. Elena let them believe it. Her one true friend at the academy was Silix, a Methri student who sat beside her in 3 different classes. The Methri were a prey species, tall and slender, with enormous eyes designed to spot predators and legs built for explosive speed. And Silix seemed almost as out of place as Elena. I do not understand why you stay, Silix said one evening as they studied together in a quiet corner of the library. The predator species treat you terribly, and they will never accept you as an equal. They do not have to accept me, Elena said. They just have to learn what I am capable of. And what is that? Elena smiled, but she did not answer. She had begun training in the academy gym during the off hours. When the equipment was empty and no one was watching the first night. A Velocian student found her running on one of the endurance machines, and he watched her with confusion as the minutes turned into an hour. Then 2 hours. Then 3. "How are you still moving?" he asked finally, and there was genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Humans are persistence predators," Elena explained. And she was barely breathing hard. "Our ancestors hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We do not need to be fast. We just need to never stop." The Velocian stared at her like she had grown a second head. And then he left without another word. Elena kept running. She added weight training to her routine. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw attention. Just steady progressive work that pushed her muscles a little further each day. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. Not even close. But they were remarkably good at adapting, at improving, at refusing to accept their limitations. And Elena had always been stubborn. Grathcall continued to mock her whenever their paths crossed. And his insults grew more creative as the weeks passed. "Still here, soft thing?" he would ask. "I thought you would have run back to your little planet by now." "Not yet," Elena would reply. And she would keep walking. "Your species is a joke," he told her one afternoon in front of a crowd of other students. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no speed. You are prey that somehow forgot to get eaten. Maybe we are just good at not being eaten." Elena said the crowd laughed, but Grathcall did not. And his ember eyes narrowed as he studied her. "There is something wrong with you, human," he said slowly. "Prey should know when to be afraid. Then I suppose I'm not prey." She walked away before he could respond. And she felt his stare burning into her back like a physical weight that night. Professor Kethel posted the demonstration schedule for the semester. Elena scrolled through the list. Torvan first, then Kethrix, then Silthkai. Working down through the predator species before moving to the omnivores, and finally the prey species at the end. Humans were listed last. She understood the message perfectly. The soft species. The confusing species. The species no one quite knew how to categorize. Had been given the final slot because no one expected anything worth watching. The class discussion the next day confirmed it. The human demonstration. A Kethrix student chittered with amusement. "What will she do?" "Show us how to run slowly and sweat." Laughter rippled through the room, and even Professor Kethal seemed to suppress something that might have been a smile. Elena sat quietly and let them laugh. She had time, and humans were very, very patient when they needed to be. Silix found her later in the library, and her enormous eyes were filled with concern. "You do not seem upset about the schedule." "Why would I be upset? They put you last because they think you have nothing worth showing. That is insulting." Elena leaned back in her chair and looked at her friend. And something in her expression made Silix's ears flatten with unease. "Last means everyone will be watching," Elena said quietly. "Last means no one will leave early. Last means maximum audience." "Maximum audience for what?" Elena smiled, and it was not a soft smile, and it was not a praise smile. For the demonstration they will never forget. The demonstration season began, and Elena watched every single one with the careful attention of a student taking notes for an exam that would determine her entire future. The Torvan went first, and Grathcall stood before the class like a god of war made flesh. He tore through reinforced combat dummies like they were made of paper, his 6 limbs moving in a blur of controlled violence that left Elena's heart pounding even from the safety of her seat in the back row. Each strike sent pieces of metal and synthetic material flying across the demonstration floor, and when he finished, the remains of 6 training dummies lay scattered around him like the aftermath of a massacre. The class erupted in applause, and Grathcall basked in the admiration like it was sunlight on his armored hide. But Torvan conquered 3 star systems before joining the Accord, Professor Kethel announced as the cleaning drone swept away the debris. Their physical capabilities remain unmatched among known species. Elena wrote in her tablet, 400 kilograms. 6 limbs, natural armor designed for maximum destruction in minimum time. The Ketheriks demonstrated next. Their blade-like arms slicing through targets with surgical precision. And then the Silthkai showed their venom delivery systems that could paralyze prey within seconds. Each predator species displayed their evolutionary gifts, and each display earned respect and admiration from the watching crowd. The pattern was clear: power meant respect, and danger meant value. Elena kept watching, kept writing, kept thinking. The omnivore species followed, showing their versatility and adaptability. And the prey species demonstrated their defensive capabilities: speed, camouflage, enhanced senses designed to detect threats before they became fatal. Silix ran a course that tested her explosive acceleration, reaching speeds that made her body blur into a streak of motion. And the crowd applauded politely, if not enthusiastically. Prey species were appreciated, but not admired, and through it all, the question hung in the air like smoke: what could the human possibly do? Elena heard the speculation in hallways and cafeterias, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, but never quite fast enough for her to miss the words. Maybe she will show us their primitive weapons. I heard humans still use chemical propellants. Perhaps a display of their so-called endurance. We can all watch her walk in circles for an hour. I heard their only advantage is that they can eat almost anything without dying. She could demonstrate that by eating station rations. Laughter. Always laughter, and Elena let it wash over her like rain on stone. The day after the mid-semester demonstrations, Grathcall found her in the hallway outside the cafeteria. He was not alone. A group of predator species students flanked him, and Elena recognized the formation for what it was: an audience. Human, Grathcall said, and his voice carried easily over the background noise of the station. Your demonstration approaches, and I find myself curious. Curious about what? Elena asked. What you could possibly show us that would justify your presence here. You have no claws, no venom, no armor. No speed worth mentioning. Your teeth cannot even tear raw meat. That is true. Elena agreed calmly. Grathcall seemed thrown by her easy admission, but he recovered quickly. So what is your plan, Sofang? Will you bore us with a lecture about human persistence? Will you run in circles until we fall asleep? I have not decided yet. The Torvan stepped closer, and Elena had to fight the instinct to step back, to run, to flee from the massive predator looming over her. She held her ground. Let me make a suggestion, Grathcall said, and his voice dropped to something almost intimate. Show us something real. Show us strength that matters, power that we can respect. And what would that look like? Grathcall spread his 4 primary arms wide, and his ember eyes burned with amusement. Lift me. The hallway went quiet. Lift me, he repeated, louder now so everyone could hear. Just get me off the ground. 1 second is all I ask. Do that, and I will call you a predator. I will acknowledge that humans belong among us. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously, and the sound broke the tension like a dropped glass. You weigh 400 kilograms, Elena said. Is that a problem? More laughter now, spreading through the gathered students. And Elena saw the trap for what it was if she refused. She admitted weakness if she tried and failed. She proved that humans were exactly what everyone believed them to be. Grathcall had constructed a perfect humiliation. 1 second, Elena said slowly. And you will call me a predator. My word on it. Soft thing. Elena looked at the Torvan, really looked at him. And she saw past the armor and the muscle and the predator confidence to the creature beneath. He expected her to fail. They all expected her to fail. I will think about it, she said. And she turned and walked away, and the laughter followed her down the hallway like a physical force by the end of the day. Everyone at the academy had heard the story. The Tiny human challenged to lift a Torvan, the soft thing, who had actually seemed to consider it the joke that would be remembered long after Elena, washed out of the program Silix, found her in the library that night, and her enormous eyes were wet with distress. "You cannot seriously be considering this," Silix said. "It is impossible. No human could lift a Torvan. The physics alone make it." "I know," Elena said, and she did not look up from her tablet. "Then why did you not simply refuse?" "Because refusing would have proved his point, and trying will prove it just as well when you fail." Elena finally looked up, and there was something in her eyes that made Silix's words die in her throat. Who said anything about failing? She turned her tablet to show Silix what she had been researching: Torvan physiology, weight distribution, center of gravity, skeletal structure, the exact placement of their limbs, and how their mass was balanced across their frame. "Elena," Silix whispered. "This is insane, maybe," Elena admitted, and she smiled. And it was the smile of a predator who had found her prey. "But humans have always been a little insane. It is how we survived." That night, she sent Professor Kethal a revised demonstration proposal. And when his response came back, a single word: "Approved," Elena began to laugh. The soft thing had a plan. Word had spread through the academy like fire through dry grass, and students who had never shown interest in the interspecies relations program suddenly found reasons to attend the final demonstration of the semester. They came to watch the human fail. Elena stood in the preparation room behind the main stage, and she could hear the murmur of the crowd. Through the walls, hundreds of voices blending into a single sound of anticipation and amusement. She wore simple athletic clothing, fitted top and flexible pants that allowed full range of motion, and she had tied her dark hair back from her face so nothing would interfere with what she was about to do. Silix stood beside her, and her slender hands were shaking. "There is still time to change your mind," Silix said. "You could do a different demonstration, show them human endurance, human problem solving. Anything but this. This is what they need to see," Elena said. "They need to see you fail? They need to see me try." The door opened, and Professor Cathal entered with his forearms folded in what Elena had learned was a gesture of uncertainty. "The hall is ready," he said. "I must confess, I am not certain what you are attempting to prove here. Grathkal weighs more than 4 times your body mass." "I know exactly what he weighs," Elena said. The professor studied her with his independently moving eye stalks, and something in her calm certainty seemed to give him pause. "Very well," he said finally. "The stage is yours." Elena walked through the door and into the demonstration hall, and the sound hit her like a wave. Hundreds of alien students packed the observation seats, their voices rising in a mixture of excitement and mockery. And she saw the recording devices positioned around the room. This would be broadcast across the entire station. Good, she wanted everyone to see. Professor Kethel took his position at the podium and raised his forearms for silence, and the crowd slowly quieted. "Our final demonstration of the semester," he announced. Elena Vasquez representing humanity. Her approved topic is human physiological adaptation and applied leverage. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd, and Elena let it wash over her without reaction. She walked to the center of the demonstration floor and stood alone under the bright lights. And she took a moment to look around at the faces watching her: predators and prey, skeptics and mockers, beings who had dismissed her species as a cosmic accident. She would teach them something new today. "My species comes from a world you classify as a Category 12 death world," Elena began, and her voice was steady and clear. "I want to explain what that actually means." She paused, and the hall was quiet now. "Curious despite themselves, Earth has temperature swings of over 100 degrees, she continued. "It has predators on every continent, creatures that hunt with teeth and claws, creatures that kill with venom, creatures that can swallow a human whole, and yet we survived. She began to walk slowly across the demonstration floor, and every eye followed her. We survived not because we were faster or stronger or more deadly than the things that hunted us. We survived because we refused to die. She stopped and faced the crowd directly. Human bodies are designed for one thing, above all else, endurance. Our ancestors hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, running for hours under a burning sun while their targets slowly failed. She tapped her chest. Dense muscle fibers, our muscles are built for sustained effort, not explosive power. We can keep working when other species have long since given up. She tapped her legs. Bipedal locomotion, we walk upright, which means our entire skeletal structure is designed to bear weight efficiently. We are walking load-bearing machines. She tapped her head. And most importantly, we have something called hysterical strength. In moments of extreme stress, human bodies can temporarily bypass the normal limiters on our muscles. Mothers have lifted vehicles off their trapped children. Soldiers have carried wounded comrades for miles. We can push beyond what should be physically possible. The hall was completely silent now, and Elena smiled. You wanted a demonstration of human capabilities, she said. So I will give you one. I need a volunteer specifically. I need the heaviest predator in this room. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then laughter began to build. They thought this was the joke, the punchline, the moment where the human admitted defeat. But then Grathcall rose from his seat. The Torvan descended from the observation area with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. And the crowd's laughter turned to excited murmurs. He walked onto the demonstration floor and stood before Elena. And the size difference was almost comical. She barely came up to the middle of his chest. You actually intend to try, Grathcall said. And there was something new in his voice. Something that might have been respect for her courage, if not her chances. I gave you my word, Elena said. Then I will give you your chance. Soft thing, I will relax my limbs and make myself as easy to lift as possible. You will still fail, but at least you will fail with honor. Elena nodded and stepped closer, and she studied his body with the careful attention she had developed over weeks of research. Center of gravity just below the chest, mass distributed primarily through the torso. 6 limbs that would hang loose and add difficulty. 412 kilograms of armored apex predator. She had done the math 100 times. She knew exactly where to place her arms, exactly how to position her feet, exactly how to engage her core and drive upward through her legs. This was not about raw strength. This was about leverage, technique, and the absolute refusal to accept failure. Ready? She asked. Grathcall relaxed his limbs, and his body settled into a passive state. Do your best, human. Elena breathed in slowly, filling her lungs completely, and she felt her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She positioned herself against his body, hooking her arms beneath his torso at the precise point she had calculated, bracing her legs in a wide, stable stance. The crowd held its breath. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment, and she thought about Earth, about the ancestors who had chased prey across endless savannas, about the humans who had climbed mountains and crossed oceans and walked on the surface of the moon. She thought about every time someone had told her species that they were too small, too weak, too soft to matter, and then she lifted. Her muscles screamed in protest as she drove upward with her legs, channeling every ounce of strength through her core and into her arms. And for one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Grathcall's claws left the floor. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. She held 400 kilograms of apex predator in the air, her body trembling with effort, her face twisted with concentration, every fiber of her being focused on the single task of not letting go. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. She set him down. The hall was absolutely silent. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence of shock, of disbelief, of a fundamental assumption being shattered. Elena staggered slightly as the weight left her arms. But she caught herself and straightened, and she looked up at Grathcol with steady eyes. The Torvan stared at her. And for the first time since she had met him, there was no mockery in his expression. There was only the raw, honest assessment of one predator recognizing another. 5 seconds, Elena said quietly. I believe you owe me a word. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Grathcol raised his head and spoke loud enough for every being in the hall to hear predator. The hall exploded. Elena Vasquez, the small soft human who had been dismissed and mocked and overlooked for an entire semester, holding a 400-kilogram Torvan warrior in the air while the galaxy watched. The recording was shared in mess halls and dormitories, transmitted to ships passing through the sector, archived in the Academy's historical records as an example of what Professor Ketho called unexpected species capability demonstration. But everyone else just called it the human lift. Elena spent the day after her demonstration hiding in her quarters. Not because she was ashamed, but because her arms hurt so badly she could barely lift a cup of water. Silix visited her with food and pain medication, and her enormous eyes were still wide with disbelief. I watched the recording 6 times, Silix said. I still do not understand how you did it. Physics and stubbornness, Elena said. And she winced as she shifted position on her bed. Mostly stubbornness. You are insane. Your entire species is insane. That is probably accurate. The Academy felt different when Elena finally emerged. The next day students, who had ignored her for months, now stepped aside as she walked through the hallways, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. A Kethrix, who had once mocked her flat teeth, nodded as she passed, and his blade arms clicked in what she recognized as a gesture of respect. A Silfkai asked if she would be willing to share information about human training methods, and Elena found herself surrounded by a small crowd of interested students before she even reached the cafeteria. She had not become popular exactly. She had become interesting professor. Cathal called her into his office that afternoon, and his forearms moved in patterns she had learned to recognize as deep thought. Your demonstration has created quite a discussion among the faculty, he said. We have been forced to reconsider our assessment of human capabilities. What does that mean? It means your species has been reclassified, the professor said, and he pulled up a document on his display screen. You are no longer listed under unclassified soft-bodied omnivores. Humans have been assigned a new threat classification. Elena leaned forward to read the screen. Novel adaptive apex. Unpredictable adaptability. Extreme persistence. Psychological resilience exceeding physiological indicators. Recommend caution in assumptions. Regarding species limitations. She sat back and smiled. Caution in assumptions, she repeated. I like that. You should, Professor Kethal said. And something that might have been humor flickered in his eye stalks. It is the first time that recommendation has ever appeared in a species assessment. Normally, we simply list what a species can do, not what they might surprise us with. That evening, Elena found herself on the observation deck, a quiet space on the outer edge of the station where students came to watch the stars and think about their place in the universe. She stood alone at the viewport, looking out at the infinite darkness scattered with points of light. And she thought about how small she was against that vastness, how small humanity was, how much they still had to prove human. The voice came from behind her, and Elena turned to find Grathcall standing in the doorway. The Torvan moved slowly into the observation deck, and for the first time she noticed that he walked differently around her, not cautiously exactly, but carefully, the way a predator moved when approaching an equal. He stopped beside her at the viewport, And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. I underestimated you, Grathcrow said finally. Most people do. It will not happen again. Elena looked up at the massive predator, at the armored hide and the ember eyes and the teeth designed for tearing flesh. And she saw something she had never expected to see there: curiosity. You did not just lift me, Grathcrow continued. You made a point. You let me set the terms of the challenge. And then you turned my own test into your demonstration. You controlled the situation from the moment I opened my mouth. I learned from watching you. Grathcrow made a sound that rumbled through the deck laughter. She realized, clever and strong, he said. Your species is more dangerous than we understood. We are not dangerous, Elena said quietly. We are just survivors. We adapt to whatever the universe throws at us, because that is what we have always done. When we could not outrun predators, we learned to outlast them. When we could not overpower them, we learned to outthink them. She turned back to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Humanity clawed its way off a death world, she said. We sailed across oceans in wooden ships, climbed mountains that should have killed us, walked on the surface of our moon. We did all of that not because we were the biggest or the fastest or the strongest, but because we refused to accept that anything was impossible. Grathcrow was silent for a moment, and then he moved to stand directly beside her, a gesture of equals, she realized. A predator acknowledging another predator. You are still soft, he said. I know. You have no claws, no armor, no venom. I know, but you are a predator. Elena smiled, and she did not look away from the stars. We always were. The galaxy just did not know it yet. They stood together in silence, watching the infinite darkness, and Elena felt something shift in the universe around her. Not a physical change, but a recognition. An acknowledgement that something new had entered the galactic community, something small and soft and utterly unstoppable somewhere out there. Other humans were making their own way into the stars, scientists and explorers, traders and diplomats, soldiers and dreamers, each one carrying the same message that Elena had delivered today. We are human, we do not give up, and we are just getting started. Grathcrow finally spoke again, and his voice was almost gentle. What will you do next, human? Elena looked at the Torvan, then back at the stars, and she thought about all the worlds out there waiting to be discovered, all the species waiting to meet humanity, all the assumptions waiting to be shattered. Everything, she said. I am going to do everything. The stars burned cold and bright in the infinite darkness, and Elena Vasquez, small and soft and absolutely unbreakable, smiled at the future, rushing toward her humanity, was ready, and the galaxy would never be the same.